study. Dr. Shirley, you are very welcome. We are very enthusiastic and expectant.
Thank you very much. Tumamina means send me. So that's what it means. But thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you to share. This is the research that I was asked to conduct, and you can see the title of it. And I'm not going to waste too much time on the front page. The presentation itself will cover a range of areas. There's the context, and because it is a research report, I will take you through some of the elements that are important in a research report, because that provides for you the comfort and of the report, the credibility of the report, and that proper research processes were followed. So there is the study aim, objectives, questions, research approach. Then we will move into the study findings, conclusions, recommendations, and some scenarios. I'm going to do a little bit of scenario, show you some scenarios, and then at the end of this, I will show you two policies, actual RPL policies. And it was lovely to see Katie present. I was part of the South African team. I didn't go to Shanghai with them, but I was very much part of the South African team that worked with Katie and Alex in that in the development of the document, etc. So that, I think, was a very good overarching view. Now we're going to dip down into two country areas. So what were the study aim and objectives? Sorry, I think my little person thing up there is in your way. I don't know how to move myself out of the way. But the aim of the study, you can see there very briefly, was to conduct that gap analysis. And I'm going to put my glasses on so that I can read it better. A gap analysis on the RPL frameworks and implementation in Uganda and Tanzania. And then the secondary or the objectives, so the aim objectives, identify ways in which the perspectives, meanings, and understandings of global, national, and local stakeholders regarding RPL have influenced the adoption and implementation of RPL. What are the meanings of RPL? Number 3, consider the elements in the current framework. And number 4, understand the influence of an NQF in the development of an efficient and effective development of your framework. The research questions therefore draw from the aim and objectives. They really just turn the objectives on their head. So really the main research question was, what are the gaps? Because that's what I was asked to look for. What are the gaps in the status of RPL frameworks and implementation to support lifelong learning in Uganda, Tanzania? Are you going to ask me, why are you introducing the concept of lifelong learning? And you'll see I introduced the concept of qualifications framework in the same study. And I think right at the outset, I need to explain that if you look at lifelong learning as a concept, and we'll get into that a bit later, but it might be worrying you, now where's RPL gone? If you look at lifelong learning, there are a whole lot of components of lifelong learning, and recognition of prior learning is one of the key mechanisms to enable people to continue on a lifetime learning journey. Lifelong, life-wide, life-deep. And that was Knut Illeris that actually coined that phrase. So I like to talk about lifelong learning and RPL, and then in introducing qualifications frameworks. Now, you would have seen in the title of the paper or the research that it talks about RPL frameworks. I have taken it to the step where qualifications frameworks are huge enablers for RPL to happen. And the two go in tandem or together. So as I present, you will see why it's important. But again, that was the main research question. Then we started looking in what ways have the meanings, understandings of international, regional, continental, local, what are the definitions and the meaning making around the definitions or terms of RPL, lifelong learning, non-formal, informal, formal learning, all of those things. How have these meanings of RPL found expression in the policies? The third one is there an emergence of an RPL policy framework in your country? And does the existence of an NQF already support the efficient and effective development? So the research approach, I'm not going to go in depth. When you do get the report, you'll be able to read it more in depth. But the study itself was multi-layered. It was multi-level and complex, not difficult. Complex has a different meaning. So it's not a single linear study. I used a qualitative research approach. I didn't use quantitative, not mixed method, but I used a qualitative approach, an interpretivist research philosophy, which is very qualitative. And my epistemology is a subjective epistemology, and I declare as the researcher, I'm using that because I interacted with what is being researched. So, and I try to eliminate bias of personal views through the literature review and through the semi-structured interviews, etc. And then I used three theoretical frameworks. And you would have heard Katie speaking about global, and she spoke about continental, regional, and she spoke about local. Now, we term it the global theory, which says you look at an issue from the three perspectives, global, continental, regional, and local, to get a really good view of what is happening, that it's not one-sided or linear. So it's the theoretical framework, the global heuristic framework, Margison's framework. And then I also use the theory of reasoned action. And this is a very important theoretical framework because it deals with behaviors. And when you start looking at behaviors, why do we battle with people not wanting to embrace recognition of prior learning? Why do binary worlds exist in this space? Why are there paradigms? Why do we ask, where is the political will to implement? What drives those behaviors? So you look at, I used two theoretical frameworks. Then I did the literature review, and my literature review, as I said, it was complex, multi-layered. So I used global, continental, regional, and local. And I looked at RPL, lifelong learning, and qualifications frameworks at all of those levels. So as I say, it's almost like a little puzzle. Then conducted the semi-structured interviews and then triangulated primary and secondary data, then came through to finally getting the final findings and recommendations. So how did I prepare for the fieldwork? DVV International provided me with the names of 4 key informants from Tanzania and from Uganda. That took a bit of time to find the key informants, the people to interview, set up the times, the diaries, the dates. And I know that Prof, one of our moderators today, was going to be one, but he had an accident. And we're very pleased to see that Prof is much better. But so to find people, and as in my country, the same in your country, you do need to get the approval, especially if you're in the ministry and you're going to be speaking about an issue that might be affecting the policy in your country. And that was well understood. So we got that. Email and WhatsApp details were confirmed, dates and times. And then I sent a questionnaire, which had already been, I'd already spoken to DVV and some of the people involved from the countries which questions should be there, and the final questionnaire was sent. So I think that helped a lot. They were able to see the questions a few days before they were actually then interviewed. And I want to say, again, a very special and deep thank you to the people who availed themselves to answer the questions and give the information that eventually is able to be presented. So if you're looking now at who comprised, what it looked like, who were the respondents, or I call them participants in the process, government officials with 37.5% were government officials. Academics, you can see 25%, international support people 25%, and there was a regulator of one of the regulating bodies. So that is a picture of the respondents. Now, I've already said the literature review. The literature review was very deep and very wide. You can see, I read, and my husband will bear testimony to that. I read a document. I read it. So I read 87 documents. It's a lot. Luckily, I used to be an English teacher before I was then an inspector of education, and then became a principal of 2 technical colleges. 21 years of my working life was spent in the TVET sector, technical colleges. I know all about the battles that we had to try and get recognized and all of those sorts of things. So I read, and to make sense of it and make notes, etc. I wanted to be credible, and I wanted to be honest in the research that I was conducting. Also then, the literature about RPL, lifelong learning, qualifications frameworks comprised some of the 87, government documents, national policies, global documents, and then a lot of reading around the actual theoretical frameworks to make sure that I was presenting an honest report. So that's the background to all of this that was put together to come up with a report. Now, one of the issues that I've always found very important, and this leads to some of those areas around definitions and meanings, because you'll see just now in the report that if people are conflicted or contest meanings around a concept, it gets very difficult to get to a point where you can then actually move from that concept and go into a policy document or draft or pilot project or whatever. If you're all around the same table with more or less similar understanding of what it is, it already starts helping. So I thought this was very important to show you a little bit of the trajectory of where RPL comes from. And I'll tell you why I found this slide important. Now, you heard Katie talking about South Africa, and yes, South Africa's NQF was promulgated post-1994. It was our first act, the South African Qualifications Authority Act in 1995. First act of our new democracy, which established SAQA, South African Qualifications Authority, and it established the fact in that act that SAQA would have to develop the South African National Qualifications Framework. But pre-94, I was very involved with the different structures, and we were envisioning what education and training would be like post-94. And the ANC had a book, we used to loosely term it the Yellow Book, ANC Yellow Book, but it was actually part of their Ready to Govern document. And the Ready to Govern document had a whole chapter on education and training and what would it be like, what would drive South Africa's education and training system post-apartheid in a democracy. And there were 4 pillars. The one was South Africa will have South African Qualifications Authority, the coordinating body for our NQF and all the related policies. Number 2, South Africa will have a national qualifications framework. Number 3, South Africa will have recognition of prior learning. And number 4, South Africa will have articulation. And the RPL and articulation are very important because it said no matter where you come from on your learning journey, through this mechanism of the NQF, you will have a route to have your knowledge, skill, competence, experience, whatever, recognized so that you can continue on a lifelong learning journey. You can continue to get work, to go and study further, whatever. And those were the 4 pillars that our country built its system on, that is post-94. But even today, there's contestation around RPL. Contestation even about an NQF, etc. And there are, so you realize you are in this world where paradigms are very entrenched. And I've always been quite forthright and a bit of I believe in being very honest. And so I once had to present a paper about recognition of prior learning, and our higher education fraternity said only 10% of any cohort coming into a university can come through via the route of RPL. And the other thing they said was, we will only, if you come through that route of RPL, we will only recognize a certain percentage of your knowledge and skill, even though you demonstrate far more. So I presented a paper and I said, this is a colonialist relic. It's not what we want. I said, is it a colonialist relic or is it essential? And I therefore did a lot of research. And some of the research, particularly Ilana Mickelson, I mentioned her there, also wrote a lot about it. Because in South Africa today, we still, even though the South African Qualifications Authority was established in 1996, I served on the first board. I was very privileged to serve on the first board, and my seat there was on behalf of TVET colleges. So, and that was a battle because the universities were also there. But it was important to show people RPL isn't something that the ANC dreamt up. RPL comes from way back when, and in fact, from the 1920s, 1940s, RPL emerged globally as a mechanism to recognize knowledge and skill of people who had gone to fight in the world wars. It was a huge movement, so I put it there. The advanced standing, adult education, all of these terms were used, lifelong learning. It replaces former concepts such as adult education in that period. And Lindemann was one of the big authors of it. So the terms he used then were adult education, lifelong learning, RPL, PLA, prior learning assessment. After the Second World War to about the 1970s, there was a shift from education to learning. And why I'm standing still here a little bit, you would have heard earlier on as well, Katie saying they use a different term to RPL. And it's just a mixture of all of these concepts. But sometimes people get stuck in a concept and they can't move on. It's really very similar. So the shift, prior learning assessment, Mickelson was writing, broadens access, the whole concept of social justice, RPL for social justice, which it really is. All of those people who were not in education, who were denied a place, didn't have money, all of those things. And then lifelong education, and the Fora report is one of the very well-known reports. Then from the early 1980s to early 2000s, there was a slight shift from the social justice concept of RPL to economic development. And you'll see later on as I present in the report, that came through came through from the participants that I interviewed, and it came through from the literature as well. So it's a both and this is reflecting. So the shift from social justice to economic development, lifelong education replaced by lifelong learning. You've got the Delors report, white papers, etc., the Lisbon strategy, and shaping Europe into a knowledge-based society using RPL as one of the mechanisms. And then today, we talk about RPL assessments, etc., in relation to national qualifications frameworks. But we've opened the field. The field now can be, we're doing RPL for social change, professional development, economic development, and a whole lot of things. So I thought, let me stand still there a while. Now, the documents that were covered, and they are all there, and you can access them. The Global Convention on the Recognition of Qualifications Concerning Higher Education. That is in 2019 published, and many countries are starting to sign up to that. Also United Nations, UNESCO driven. But it enables this global referencing system, which enables mobility in countries for people who are traveling or going somewhere. And this helps as well hugely for asylum seekers and refugees, because it's a system. It's not an NQF, but it's a system of global recognition of learning outcome kind of things, profile, graduate profiles, etc. The other document, which is a very good document, a very comprehensive, is the UNESCO UIL, European Training Foundation, and CEDAFOP, which is the organization looking at technical and further education, their global inventory document. And then thirdly, looking at the African Union Commission, OECD policy priorities for African policymakers. So those were some of the documents, and they certainly informed the literature review. What did I look at in the continental regional? The Addis Convention. I was very much part in a South African team in our contribution to the Addis Convention. And in fact, did a lot of work in helping to write it, frame it, and that kind of thing from the South African perspective. I was very involved in the African Continental Qualifications Framework, the ACQF, which is developing, growing, and a very important document for our continent. Regional and international quality assurance bodies. You get the qualifications verification networks. You get ICAIA. You get a whole lot of them. SADC. It was the SADC, and our Tanzanian colleagues were very much part of that. And I can remember in 2017, on behalf of SADC, I presented the SADC NQF to the ministers of education at their regional conference, and it was approved and accepted as the SADC Regional Qualifications Framework. Then I also looked further in continental at the European one, the Asia Pacific, Latin American and Caribbean, and being part of the virtual university of the small states of the Commonwealth. So I looked at all of those to see what were they saying and how were they lining up. The next ones, now we come to the local in the country. In the literature review, I looked at an Irish example. Now you're going to say, why the Irish example? Because the Irish example picks out certain of the aspects and elements that we, certainly as South Africans, but certainly in many parts of the continent as well, picks up some of the issues that are pertinent to take note of. I looked at the South African perspective in the lit review, then the Tanzanian and Ugandan countries' perspectives. So what were the documents that I was given? I was sent documents by the two countries. For the Ugandan one, and as I say, I read all of those words. And I used to have a boss. He passed away very sadly, but he was one of those incredible public servants when I worked in the Department of Higher Education and Training. And whenever there was a query or a question or a something, unless it wasn't written anywhere yet, and then we'd have to go and develop it. But if it was somewhere, he would always say, go to the source document, your starting point. What does the source document say? So I read the Ugandan Vocational Qualifications Framework document. I read your Ministry of Education and Sports, your TVET Policy 2019, your Vision 2040, your National Literacy Policy. And to me, that's a very good document. I enjoyed reading that. And in fact, I've said to my South African colleagues, we need to take a few leaves out of that book because it's a really good document. And I like the responsibilities and everything given to different governing organizations and bodies in Uganda. I read your constitution. I read your higher education qualifications framework document with great interest and your TVET policy. Individually, all of them are good documents, and I enjoyed the reading of those. The Tanzanian documents that I read your Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, the review of your Education Act, your Tanzanian Education Training Policy 2014, but the 2023 edition. I read your qualifications framework, and I worked with the Tanzanians in 2013, 2012, 2013, those years, up to early 2014, with the TCU and with other colleagues in looking at what could frame their TCU policies and what could this TQF look like. And I remember sitting for hours round the table in the discussions while they argued, should we have an 11 level, 10 level, 9 level, 8 level qualification types, etc. Very, very good memories of a lot of hard work. And then the Constitution. So you can see a range of documents. From all of that background, which was the one part of the study, I now move into the study findings, remembering there were two things I did in the qualitative. So I did this massive document analysis, the lit review, and then I didn't do formal grounded theory. Those of you who know grounded theory, everybody fights about it. Everybody's got an argument about it. But I used the semi-structured interviews, and I used a loose approach to grounded theory to do all the analysis, reading everything, writing down all the words that were common to everyone, then getting to themes, and then finally getting to smaller, and finally getting to the findings. So I used that approach, and that's why when you read the report, you'll see all of those steps happening, because you need to do that and interrogate the data to make sure nothing new is coming out. You've saturated that data. So what happened in the findings? The first thing that emerged were that the key themes, number of key themes emerged. And each of the key themes had little subsets. So the first key theme Now you can imagine, I taught the 10A class, and about 8 of the 15 first team rugby players were in that class. And they thought the only thing in life that mattered was rugby. Well, I taught them how to read Romeo and Juliet. And there was one that used to be the one in the middle of the scrum. And I used to say, okay, today you're going to read the part of Juliet, and I'll choose another one, and you're going to be Romeo. Well, you can imagine, he would beg and plead, and I'd say, it'll help you later in life. So, okay. But getting back to the definitions, and having had a loud voice as a teacher, the key theme that emerged, and that's why I spent a bit of time just now, was that definitions and meanings are very, very important. And from what the literature review showed, and I carefully went into every document, the international literature, Ugandan, Tanzanian, and in the template, I compared to see what were people thinking about these themes: lifelong learning, RPL, formal, non-formal, informal. All of those were coming out as sub-themes. And looking across the literature and looking at the respondents' answers, there was a great deal of similarity or consensus around the meanings, which to me was a very positive thing, because already that is an excellent starting point where you already have consensus. And some of the definitions that Katie put up earlier are very much the conventional definitions used, and people understand them, etc. The next big theme that emerged, both from the literature and certainly from the respondents, were around the main policy initiatives. And what were people saying about that theme? There were subsets again. The need to develop policies came through very, very clearly. Policies, particularly RPL, lifelong learning, and qualifications frameworks. So that became a very, very big theme, that people recognized there was a lot of work happening, and there were individual policies, but a comprehensive, cohesive policy which pulled it all together, where the political will was matched by budget and funding. That simply wasn't there yet. Another issue that came through quite strongly in about 80% of the responses was that the support for RPL was withdrawn from the higher education system. TCU and in Uganda, higher education universities were not recognizing RPL. In fact, they'd had it, they'd looked at it, they'd worked with it in certain contexts, but the actual support again for RPL was withdrawn, and that came through very clearly and in the documents. What was very important was that came through in all the respondents in Uganda was the skilling every Ugandan. And we heard your minister this morning speaking about that, the importance of that. So those were big policy initiatives. What do we need to do? Which policies do we need to have? How are we going to work around that RPL issue, the support withdrawn? And what does skilling every Ugandan actually mean? It means you have to acknowledge, embrace, and implement lifelong learning, RPL, etc. Another big theme was national priority areas. Now, in the national priority areas came through very strongly development of assessors, moderators, and an assessment framework, which is very important. If you're going to work in RPL, if you're going to do anything in, whether it's articulation, in whichever space, you need to have that. And the development of people to be able to understand how to design an RPL assessment from start to finish, very important. Another important one was the economic sectoral priority focus. People need to get into the economy. And I think it was in Uganda, one of the policy documents that said only 23 point something % of Ugandans actually draw a formal salary check. So the development of economic sector and the ability to enter it, whether it's through a non-formal, informal, entrepreneurial, whichever route. But that was a huge issue. We need to, RPL must help so that people have access to better economic prospects, and then very clearly development of a lifelong learning policy in which RPL was embedded, and the NQF. One that came out very strongly, and you'll see it just now in the findings, policy segmentation. Virtually every participant spoke about that. And they spoke about each subsector decides its own approach. So yes, there are qualifications frameworks in Uganda and Tanzania, but you might have one only for the TQF. You might have one only for TVET. You might have one only for the vocational system. You don't have a comprehensive one which enables recognition, articulation. So it's not that there is no RPL in the country. There is. And a lot of it happens in spaces like your vocational system, your technical TVET system, but it's not speaking across. So there was that huge issue coming through and saying people, it's chaotic, said one respondent, one participant. So what came out as, if we have lifelong learning as an all-encompassing policy, this would help us, and a comprehensive NQF or NQF policy, that would help us get rid of that policy segmentation. Another big key area was the policy ownership. Who owns it? In South Africa, we always say, who's the boss? Who's the boss? And people, everybody wants to own it, and everybody wants to, and you say, okay, you carry on and you do it, and then they don't do it, and then you say, well, now we're going to take it back. So in Tanzania, it's just endorsed the Tanzanian qualifications framework. It was a document that was there 10, 11 years ago. It's been reviewed, recently endorsed, but there is still no body or one place to coordinate the TQF, very importantly. So who must be that? There is a need to establish a body that will do this, and we must be, and I love that word, intentional about it. In Uganda, and this is just very summarized because obviously the time we have to, the report is much more fuller about this. Uganda, there is a matter of institutional politics, which means the increase of somebody's mandate will mean a decrease of somebody else's mandate. And you see that happening everywhere. When you want to do function shifts and things. It's a long negotiation process. Now, I'm not so sure how very unionized Uganda is or Tanzania. In South Africa, we're very unionized. And our workers and our people are very, and it's good. I used to be part of on behalf of our staff, part of the trade union, and we used to go in, a colleague and me, go negotiate for the staff, and better salaries, better deal, better things. So I'm very aware of those things. But it does affect you. If you know your mandate's going to decrease, what's going to happen to me? And then the fact that there are different elements of the education and training system in different ministries makes the system very difficult to manage. So that came out. Gaps and challenges across the board. No national guidelines creates a space for people to say yes or no to RPL, to articulation, whatever. A huge need for improved communication. And I was quite taken by a few of the participants who said people don't even know that there is such a thing to help them. We need to improve communication. We need to tell the story from the highest levels right down to the people, socialize them around those issues. Difficult access entry requirements, the story of people having to go and work now for 3 years. Maybe they don't have the money. Now they have to go and pay for RPL. They just never get there. And the very people needed the most are the people who don't have the money to be able to get there. Very important. And a huge issue, and the minister spoke, Katie spoke, finances, and resources of the people and the places. So what did Tanzania say? Its next steps and support. And there you see I've used the actual code names of the participants. T01, 02, 03, 04. Real people who said these things. And everything else were the real people, but there you go. This thing, we need a champion for RPL. We need a national institution to champion this RPL issue. Support is needed to prepare the guideline document. The training of people is necessary. T03 says, put in place training and facilities to help RPL be achieved. Capacity building. We need financial support. T02 said, critical support is needed to put in place a micro-credential framework. You heard Katie speaking. South Africa is very busy now looking at our NQF. How is micro-credentialing going to work? And I believe in it. I believe it works well because people are working and learning. And the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted for everybody that it can never be business as usual again. So that kind of thing. And then establish technical teams for the implementation of the TQF. So those are some of the next steps. What was Uganda's next step? What were the people saying? Uganda 01 said we must set the tone for the direction that the policy must take. A hugely important issue. And just now when I show you some strategy type of pictures, how you can strategize, you'll see that set the tone. U2 said we need a demonstration of RPL and how it contributes to social transformation of the economy. Remember what I said when I was speaking Delors, for a report, all of that. And it was saying it's for social justice, it's for social this, it's for the economic growth. There you are. We need legal frameworks, policies. I believe the Ministry of Education and Sport can manage the RPO and the QF. U03 said, establish where we are. What is this road? What is the roadmap? Put it in place. Benchmark. We need structures to be in place. U04 said there is a need to institutionalize the work, come up with a gap analysis, set up advisory committees, and to oversee. Who should oversee, identify? Who's the boss? And I'm just using the term loosely. We need technical support and exposure to RPL practices. What were the findings? There are 11 findings, and I've summarized them. First finding, recognition of prior learning is acknowledged very widely in both countries, but a comprehensive and cohesive RPL policy does not yet exist across all sectors. It's separated, segregated, disaggregated. Government ministries or departments are responsible for the development of legislation and policies. Your policy documents very clearly say, as did the participants, the ministry is responsible. We are the technical team, we're the hands, we advise. I'm the research officer, but the government department is the one that makes the policy and the legislation, which is generally the legislation. Certainly, policies have an overarching policy. Very clearly, the higher education sector does not support RPL. You have to get them on board. Communicate again, talk again, stakeholders, negotiate, sit around the table, show them that it's not going to undermine their quality or the integrity of their qualification. But in fact, when you do RPL properly, and I've done work in that space, my RPL candidates are always as good as people coming through the formal route, if not better than. So engage them. Very important finding, when you ascribe similar meanings and definitions of key concepts, it aids understanding, and you can start working. Another very interesting finding across all your policy documents and from the respondents, government's approach to RPL policy development is generally favorable. And we heard the minister this morning. You read, you hear what the participants said. A RPL is established in the adult learning pathway, including non-formal and informal learning. RPL includes all of that. That's very clearly came out. National RPL policy will achieve a cohesive approach to delivering RPL nationally. Okay, so there we go. You've seen all of those. I've covered them. And you will get the presentation, Frauke. They will get it as well. Okay, so you'll see there that governments are favorable. The ministries are really where legislation lies. RPL is important. Bring the higher education sector back on track. And RPL is established in the adult learning pathway. It exists there already. And I saw some beautiful examples of that in the documents and from the respondents. National RPL policy will achieve this cohesion you're looking for. Policy segmentation, we've seen it. And we've got this, and I'll give you the example. It's disruptive for framework development and RPL development. Now in South Africa, we've got our NQF. And we've got an RPL policy. I'll show it to you just now, the SAQA one. But when I worked in the ministry, the minister said, I want you to deliver for me my RPL coordination policy. And he had a very good reason. The very reasons that I've shown you. Everybody's doing their own thing. Some want it, some don't. He said, we need this overarching one. And that was one of the 4 things I had to do for the minister, was that policy. And the segmentation, I told you about the higher education one, where the 10% cohort or whatever. So that had to be fixed. And his overarching policy was very clear statements that said, you can get a whole qualification through RPL. You can come from any place and be RPL, etc., etc. The disruption in the system created because there was segmentation could only be fixed when the minister had his policy and said, this is the way we're going. Then SAQA had to develop or align its policy, and our other quality councils had to align, and our NQF Act says all of these other policies have to align to the minister's policy. It's a clear statement. A single coordinating organization that coordinates it, the finding is, will foster development and implementation. Capacity building from expert practitioners will enhance implementation. And we're in a room of experts. And we are in a room of people who know their work very well. So capacity building, and my husband will bear testimony to that. I've done so much, been out there. I wrote a guideline book I sent to Frauke and customize it for whoever. You need people to actually say, this is assessment 101. This is moderation 101. This is how you support a student. This is an appeal system. Because people talk RPL, they like it, they know it. But then they step back because how do we do it? Where do we start? And then unfunded and under-resourced policy mandates remain incomplete. So those are the 11 big findings backed up by a lot of info. So here we come to the recommendations, and there are six recommendations, and I've taken the opportunity to actually put some of the text that came out from a whole lot of other areas, put it in there. Recommendation 1 is ascribing similar meanings and definitions of key concepts aids understanding. And that I can assure you is there. All of us together have a similar understanding. That one in Uganda and in Tanzania, that one exists across your policy documents, the participants, the different people. The first recommendation is that the participants from Uganda and from Tanzania, therefore, should develop a glossary of terms We did that in South Africa. We call it our NQFpedia. And it started small and it grew and grew. But you know what we did? We made it a social compact document. By that we mean everybody had to sign it and say, we agree, we will use these terms in all our policy documents, and when we write about it, those are the terms we use. It aids, it helps, it socializes people around meanings. So that glossary of terms is that is well consulted with all stakeholders and agreed to. It's helpful. So now when we have a definition and somebody's wanting to go off the track or onto the dust road, we say, wait, come have a look. We all agreed to this. Oh, okay, forgot. But obviously, you need to look at it every so often. It should be used as the nationally accepted definition, and our ministry signed it. Our ministry was the first people to sign it, and then SACWA and the others. So that's the first recommendation. Second one, a national RPL policy will achieve a cohesive approach, and this is that a national RPL policy is important. If the two countries want to implement RPL in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, numbers of the participants mentioned that as a driving force, and in line with any UNESCO agreements that you might be signed up to. The many benefits of this are socioeconomic, community development, etc. And during the development phase must be widely consulted with citizens, socialized across the country. Recommendation 3 that we've said it's the segmentation issue, and we're saying the third recommendation is that a policy template should be drawn up to identify all the policies which are causing segmentation. I used to call it a helicopter view. So you put them all there and you see what do they all say about this issue. And then you see, oh, well, that one's not aligned. So there is a challenge there, and you can start fixing it. Such an exercise is intensive, but it provides people who will be working on the policy document with to have a deep sense of which policy should possibly become redundant and no longer serving your needs or your local needs. The fourth one is a single coordinating organization fosters this development and implementation. And therefore is that a concept document. And just now I'm going to show you a quick scenario of how you can do this. Fourth recommendation is that a concept document should be developed in which scenarios are presented of who will be the overarching ministry. And the mechanism I'll show you just now, you can use it for that as well. Or which organization or body can be put in place to coordinate the country's qualifications framework and RPL development. Again, the concept document should be widely consulted with stakeholders before it is developed into a piece of legislation as an act. Why do I keep on stressing that? Because when you've consulted widely and everyone's had their voice heard and they buy in, then it becomes a social compact. And we've agreed. And we've said, yes, that's what we want. We have in South Africa, don't know if you have it, we have indabas and lechotlas. The indaba and the lechotla. You sit around that table and you all say and you all talk and you eventually achieve some level of consensus. Very, very useful mechanism to do that. But again, concept document, and only once all of that is done, you design your roles, responsibilities, chains of accountability, etc. Recommendation 5, capacity building from expert. I suggest always that a theory of change helps a lot as a mechanism or as a tool. It's an exercise that should be undertaken under the guidance of a subject matter expert who understands how to do a theory of change, because there you look at what do you envision, where are we going? But then you look at what steps have to be taken and what the outcomes are and what the outputs are and what the final outcomes must be. And later on, you can do impact studies based on that. So very importantly, the capacity building for that theory of change exercise helps you get a very clear vision. And it also helps you to think how much it's going to cost, by when, who's going to do it, who's going to be responsible. It's an intensive exercise, a very, very good one. And when you've done this, suddenly the writing of that policy seems to work well. And the sixth one, you have to, once the theory of change has been undertaken, a clear costing of all actions, activities that should be done. And the budget submitted to the ministry that will be responsible for this, and the commitment from the ministry, budget from Treasury, will be available. It affords, therefore, the implementing organizations the opportunity to work comfortably and happily. So those are the 6 recommendations. They pull in. Remember, when you do a big data analysis of interviews, and I said grounded theory, you start with this huge list. Then you cluster them into similar themes. Then you cluster that again into smaller themes, and then into findings. And then the findings again, some might be similar, and you cluster them again into recommendations. So that's how I presented that. But now I'm going to move into scenarios very, very quickly. And I'll jog through this. And at another time, you can look at it. I'm saying globally, we are facing a rapidly evolving landscape, shaped by technological advancements, shifting workforce demands, policy changes, very uncertain environment. How do we go forward? Scenario planning helps us in the following ways: to anticipate critical uncertainties and respond, prepare for gradual changes and sudden disruptions. COVID taught us that lesson. And explore diverse and strategic options to ensure long-term resilience and innovation. So I'm going to very quickly take you through Dato's 4 futures, the 4 archetypes of the future. What does he say? And you can use this to think about RPL, etc. How do you want to go about developing your policy? And reflect, where did we get stuck? Maybe in one of these. So there are 4 archetypes. They're all different, but they all draw from each other. The first one, number 1, is the status quo. Growth, but status quo. This one envisions a future where current trends continue on their existing trajectory with incremental improvements. It assumes that challenges will persist, but can be managed within the current system. And maybe that's part of the challenge in both countries. Certainly in South Africa, it was a challenge. Well, we're happy, we can maybe, and suddenly our youth want something different. Fees must fall in South Africa taught us a huge lesson. It was as a result of status quo. And suddenly everything disrupts, and then we go into meltdown, into the collapse. Another scenario is a future in which societal, environmental, or economic systems reach a breaking point and fail, leading to significant disruption. We just have to think of how many countries are having overthrows of their governments, etc. It's that kind of thing. How happy are our young people to be unemployed? We call them the NEET, not in employment, education, or training, the NEET youth. We have the highest unemployment rate amongst youth in the world. And we always say, how much longer can we contain that before collapse happens? Because they do have an expectation of a better world, economic future, jobs, etc. So discipline. In this scenario, the focus shifts to stability and long-term sustainability. It implies a future where growth is constrained by strict regulations, resource management, and a commitment to social and environmental balance. Not the worst place to be. And most of us are sort of there. Then we get where we want to go. And I know in South Africa, this is where we're wanting to go. We're in the discipline place. We've got elements of status quo, elements of chaos, but we're sort of more disciplined. But we're wanting to go there, which refers to a radically different future shaped by fundamental changes in technology. RPL online works magically. And tomorrow when I share RPL cases, I will show you how we use online ways of doing it, even visiting sites virtually. So these sort of changes, this archetype suggests a complete reimagining of systems driven by breakthrough innovations and shifts. So really that's what it looks like. I'm not going to go through that now because we've got to get questions happening. But this is the typical thing you'll see. So in the middle, you've got this critical uncertainty. RPL Lifelong Learning Qualifications Framework in Uganda and Tanzania. Orange dot. Where do we go? We need a policy. Everybody said it. We need somebody to own the policy and be the boss, if I can use it. We need the money. We need buy-in. We need all of those things. So scenario one, status quo, I told you what that was. And that lies in the conservative gradual space. Scenario two is the discipline. You're moving, you're going, there's strict resource constraints, however, etc. But it's starting to move to the expansive thinking, etc. Scenario three is the collapse, very much, and it can be very abrupt. It's a conservative, you've been conservative, very abrupt. Scenario four, transformation. And there again, what it tells us about it. If we look at the conservative approaches favor preserving the current system, from what I read and heard for the two countries, you don't want that. You rather want to be in the expansive space, pushing to the transformational space. Then again, there we start looking fundamental action. If you're in scenario one, you just stopgap. You're putting plasters. Stop this, stop that plaster there, stop the bleeding there, stopgap. Scenario two, you're starting to do fundamental action. But scenario three, suddenly there's total breakdown. And scenario four, this breakthrough based on a whole lot of things. And there again, breakdown, failure or collapse of systems. Stopgap, you can see breakthrough and fundamental actions. There you see it again. So if you're in the transformation thing, there's a sense of abundance, excitement, opportunity. And I think that's where you are, where you are around. So how are we going to embrace it? Or are we defensive? Are we frightened? Are we insecure? And these are things, as you start the journey, you have to decide as a collective, where are we going? And again, the response to that, so discipline scenario two, fundamental action, or are you transformation, breakthrough, etc. The four frameworks for the future. The collapse one, where societal, environmental, economic systems are reaching breaking point. Continued growth or the status quo, where it says, okay, we'll continue, but slowly. Challenges will persist, but we'll manage them with the current system. That's not working here. Discipline, where you're using what you've got, commitment to social, environmental balance and transformation. So thank you very much. That is the report. The report itself is about 179 pages, somewhere there, plus about 60 pages of transcript, and which would, depending on how it works, be probably made available. It is quite a bit of reading and all the documents there, but I'm opening for questions. And I've got about 20 minutes, I think, of just over 15 minutes for questions until the time's up. Oh, I wanted to show you the policies very quickly. May I? Or should we do questions? First questions, then I'm going to show you very, very quickly two policy examples. questions. I'm not checking the chat. I don't know if anybody's checking in the online chat thing. No questions yet. Online, no questions. It was either very boring or you're still battling to decide, do I like, there's a question.
Yeah, thank you for your nice presentation. And I have some questions, but also some comments on the presentation.
Sorry, I'm just getting my book to make some notes. Please, sir, go ahead. I'm ready to write.
I can proceed. Yeah, so thank you. I want to go back to what you said and take it back to you as a question to say, can someone get a whole qualification for RPL? And on top of that, I just want to ensure that we speak one language with what my brother Robert said in the morning, Dr. Robert, that we also want to look at the competencies that somebody develops through informal learning. Now, when it comes to citations to too much audio training, are we now talking the same language that is on board, but also we look at people who are coming up with competence that they have acquired through informal learning. But the other thing is that you said about Tanzania, and there was an issue of not having the national guidelines in the country. But a comment on this is that we have guidelines actually. If you look at the TCU, there was a guideline for RPL, and there's a very nice story of the current member of parliament, the Shigongo in the country, who has acquired his bachelor's degree through RPL. And there are also guidelines for TVET, that VETA has been using that. Now the gap is not on having the guideline, but the gap is the extent to which these guidelines are being used and whether they are inclusive to accommodate different categories of beneficiaries in the country. Because our push was to see that the guidelines also accommodate those who are coming from A and E. And so the gap should be established on the way these guidelines have been implemented, but what are their current status? Do we need to go back and revise the guidelines to ensure that the scope integrates all sorts of beneficiaries? And there was also a question of having some disruptive policies in the process. But again, a comment on this, that in Tanzania, it's fortunate that we only have one education training policy. We don't have many policies as it is here in Uganda. And that policy accommodates all subsectors within one policy. And if you look at the current policy, the mention of RPL is well. So it has been accommodated clearly within the policy. But the gap then is coming from the policy now to having the strategies, to having the more current guidelines. So this is the gap that comes on board. But in terms of policy ecosystem in the country, I think that is quite intense. All right, now my other comment that I want to stress, what you can also contribute from the end and the expertise, is on the RPL, the recognition of RPL, so speaking, in two areas. And I'm focusing on the economic sector you have just mentioned, economic sector vis-a-vis the RPL. One is the recognition of those who went through RPL in the national schemes of service, that is to say, where they will be recognized in the form of employment, and the comment on that. But number two, which is my greatest interest, is recognition of RPL. I mean, on the scheme that is not what we know now. So now it's clear with us, we know that there are schemes of service, but there is a hidden scheme that is being used. We don't know what the name of it, but it is used by employer organizations to employ many skilled people in the countries, and they don't even ask where you have gone through your trainings. Now here, a little question is, do you think it is necessary to have a parallel scheme of service that recognizes those who went through RPL, even if the formal scheme is currently not recognizing them in the form of employment? But all right, I'm asking that there's now the scheme. Yes, I'm saying there's another hidden scheme, which I don't know the name of it, that the employer recognizes country people who were going through. It might be RPL or not RPL. Now the question is, do you think it's necessary to introduce another scheme that will help learners who have gone through RPL to be recognized, even if they're not in the formal scheme of service? And say, as a country, we can say, employers, you can use this scheme to recognize my illiterate adult who has been, going through a number of training through ICOLA, that and that, but you can recognize the skills that the person has and employ him, even though at the government level they cannot be recognized. So that's the question, the idea of it. But another one is based on your experience now as a board, as a chair of SACA. Okay. Oh, you were in the board. All right. Oh, now that experience. Now based on your experience in the SACA. To what extent does SACA recognize ABET? Because I saw it, the South African ABET, ABET basic education training. And to what extent does ABET fit into the South African qualification framework? And do you have the experience of learners who have been recognized in terms of their vertical articulation through ABET? And here, I really wish if you can help me to address this into pathway. The first pathway, those who are coming through complementary learning, I mean those who are coming from the programs that complements the formal education. So they might be learning through homeschooling, learning through ODL, that. But the other part, those who are coming, like the ICOLA program you have known here in Uganda, like the ICOLA, like the ICBA in Tanzania, where the guests come to learn literacy, to learn skills development. It's not about learning what is the formal learning. They come through this other pathway, but based on the competence that they develop, they will wish to grow upward and say one day to have their degree in hand. So I really wish if you can, but if you cannot, it's okay. But if you can, to help you know your experience in terms of these two parts. So thank you. I'm ending here at the moment, but I'll come back later.
That's a handful.
I hope that tomorrow some of your questions will be more fully answered, because today wasn't. Moderator, may I answer some of these questions? Okay, yes, people can achieve the whole qualification through RPL. Our policy allows it, and I have conducted RPL exercises with large numbers of people to achieve the full qualification, because if you understand how to design RPL and what it means, and I'm going to, if I may, use this board. And it might answer some of the other questions as well. So this is how we would work. So if that is the qualification that is registered on our NQF, and let's say, for example, this is a qualification for a chef in a kitchen, the chief chef. And the qualification has a lot of learning outcomes, or sometimes we call them exit level outcomes. And there they go, all of them. And here is your classroom of people. And they're all sitting in the classroom. And you're the teacher, facilitator, lecturer. The end of the year comes and they're going to now write the exam. What does the good teacher do? The good teacher goes and looks. My curriculum has been designed around those learning outcomes. My syllabus, curriculum, call it what you want. And I'm going to set the exam paper and I'm going to ask that and do there. And maybe this was a project during the year, so I won't ask. That's very important, that. And so we go. And here's my exam paper, and I'm using old terminology. In South Africa, we call them assessment tools or whatever else. And they go and sit and they write for 3 hours. And they've learned the work, they've been in the kitchen, they've done the work. This side, you get a whole lot of people. And they never went to the university or the college or the school. They've come through a non-formal route maybe, sometimes even an informal route. And they want that piece of paper because they get the chance to get a wonderful job. So what does a person in RPL do? You do nothing different to what you did with these. You look at the learning outcomes. You design your assessment tool using the same learning outcomes. The difference lies in how you produce your evidence. These might have rote learned their way. And I always say in South Africa, we teach all our matrics to be plagiarists when they get to university because they rote learned their way through matric. Now they go first year university and they think they can just write anybody's things without referencing or quoting. Okay, so these rote learned. These people have come through the journey of life. And maybe as a South African, I'm just very aware of it because of the apartheid history. It's very present. It's still very present. The young people there who live in homes that don't even have a bookshelf with books. So I'm very aware of it. Maybe it's not like that here. So you get lots of these. But they know what they're doing. And I've seen it because I've done it. I've actually designed the tools, been with these people. I use the same exit level outcome. Their method of evidence, I'll say to them, have you seen all the different knives you can use in a kitchen? Yes. And by the way, when you're doing Japanese sushi, you use that knife. Why? Oh, because they will tell you. They'll demonstrate. They know knowledge, competence, experience. Same question I asked them. They wrote it. These will tell me, write it maybe, demonstrate, talk. And the evidence here can be written. Excuse me. I also always interview them, oral interview. So their portfolio of evidence provides their life story, their learning history. And that's why I say you can get a full qualification. The universities don't like it, a lot of them, but some are moving. University of the Western Cape, for example, wonderful institution that really recognizes this route. So now we're talking ABET, and I'm coming to that question. And you said in the adult learning pathway, now this is South Africa's NQF, we have 10 levels. We used to have 8, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is PhD level, masters, this is honors and advanced diplomas, etc. Level 7 is your first degree or a higher a diploma. This can be a diploma level as well or a higher certificate. This is a certificate. This is our matric, NQF level 4. That's 12 years of schooling. Level 1 is equivalent to what we call grade 9 or standard 7, some people call it. It's the second year of high school. And this would be equivalent to what we call ABET level 4. But underneath here, recognized by our NQF and SACWA, we've got ABET levels 1, 2, 3, leading up to 4. And it's all recognized. By the time they get to level 4, they're literate, numerate, and everything at the same level as somebody in grade 9. But they've started at a level 1, illiterate, innumerate. So ABET is part of our bigger system. And the ABET happens through our community education and training colleges or our adult learning centers or the bigger learning centers. So I hope that helps a little bit with that question. You say your competencies. Look at the competencies, the non-formal training, etc. That's why I wanted to use this thing here. Your competencies, your knowledge, and your skills developed through life, if you're an RPL candidate or somebody coming through a non-formal or informal route, or even a lifelong learning route, where your knowledge, skills, and competencies were developed doesn't matter. That's what we said. Here is the center. Whichever route you're following, that was our policy conceptualization. Doesn't matter which route life brought you, you want that thing. And we are going to recognize any route as long as we recognize the competency for you in your particular qualification you want. But we don't only have qualification RPL. We've got RPL for asylum seekers and refugees, where there's a whole mechanism used. We've got RPL for a designation, which isn't a qualification. A different approach. We've got different forms of RPL where formal, non-formal, informal learning are recognized as long as they translate into evidence against that learning outcome of the formal qualification. And I don't know if that answers that question. You asked me about, and I would like to say I recognize, and I think I said it, but maybe not clearly enough, that both Tanzania and Uganda have got RPL. And some of the RPL is very well practiced, particularly in the vocational, the adult learning space, etc. What you don't have is an RPL policy in Tanzania. It's NACTVET is very strong. They've got their thing. TCU has got an RPL thing, as has the vocational. There isn't a single comprehensive policy which guarantees learning pathways for articulation. And the documentation was very clear, as were the respondents' responses, that certain of the routes or pathways don't recognize. So you can go the vocational route, you can get this, you can get your certificate, but when you want to be recognized for further learning, you might be turned away. But there was a very interesting case where the business world, industry, formal working world actually recognizes this, what you call almost the hidden route they recognize those people. And can I tell you where there's a slight similarity? Again, South Africa, which is where my learning is around this issue. Companies are starting to say, by the time you've developed a qualification, we've already appointed that youngster, that person's already working, especially in the technology field, telephone, all of those areas. The young people are already working there, fixing phones, doing this, doing that. Part of the hidden skills that industry wants are what I call soft skills. And that is something that we need to recognize, that the people who've worked informally, they've done their own thing, they've built a business, they streetwise, they smart, they know how to work in a team, they know how to do this. Whereas the youngster or person coming maybe through the formal thing has not yet had real world happening. They don't know how to work in a team. They don't know how to communicate effectively with each other, etc. Those soft skills. So I think it could be part of that hidden thing. And I don't think that you need separate streams. We're trying to say, when we're looking at an RPL system, it must be all-inclusive. And everybody comes to the table with their query, question, issue, and the policy that emerges must be all-inclusive and be able to contain different routes, different pathways, and different anomalies. But we can talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. The economic sector recognition of those who went through, and then you talk about that hidden skill issue. So that's one of the things. I don't think you need two separate parallel pathways. I think you must try and bring everybody in. Reason I'm saying so, it's important that people get it's documented and recorded somewhere, that when they want a piece of paper, they've got that piece of paper. I've seen too many people turned away. They've got such knowledge and skill. They are that pipeline of skilled people that your country needs. We don't need to go and look elsewhere for skilled and capable people. We've got a pipeline, but they don't have a piece of paper, same as other countries. Then you spoke about that parallel, the scheme of service, introduce another scheme. I would suggest that if it's in a bigger comprehensive policy, that can then be, okay, NACTVET, you're going to look after this component of it. But universities and the others, you all recognize that. Universities, you're going to look after that. But all of you others recognize each other so there's nobody left behind. And nobody has a dead end when they achieve. So to me, that is something that came out in the participants. There must be no dead ends. People who get turned away, the award must always have value. I've spoken a bit about the ABET context. I don't know if I've answered all your questions correctly, so I hope so, but tomorrow we can engage again. I'm sensitive to the time.
Dr. Shirley,
Yes.
We have about 19 participants online, and I would like just to take one question from our online audience. What strategies can be put in place to avoid policy segmentation, since it is disruptive for qualifications framework formulation? And it is from Dr. Zali Mbike Majanja.
Okay, if they could put the question, can we see it again? Okay. What strategies can be put in place to avoid policy segmentation? That strategy that I said of together writing a national policy. Now, you can have policies per subsector, but it mustn't deviate from the national policy. So if the minister in our country, the minister's policy was very clear. It said you can get a qualification, a part qualification, or a skills program through RPL. So if the universities, our Council on Higher Education has their policy on RPL for the universities, there are certain overarching principles it should not breach. But there will be specificities for the universities. But what is a saving grace in a way And that's why our minister went the route of having a national RPL and a national articulation policy, which is the overarching guiding one. And the others need to be aligned, but will have some differences in the operationalization of it. But so that's one way. There's even a lack of comprehensive adult education policy for Uganda. I'm not going to argue the point. When I read the Ugandan documents, I thought that the policy for adult education was actually a nice policy. It was well worded, and an existing policy is narrowly focused on adult literacy. I agree that when a country, and we have it as well, when a country has significant numbers of adults who are not literate, it has to be a focus area, because you need to take them with you, but you possibly need the both and, not the either or. And maybe that's this comprehensive lifelong learning policy that will address those things. Will the RPL not be reduced to basically functional integrated literacy competencies? No. I've conducted RPL for people for master's degrees. I've conducted RPL for people who want to access a doctorate. And I've conducted RPL for adult learners who want to now access their first formal qualification. So no, RPL can be applied across the system. I'm looking, Salam, I can tell that the scenario is the same in Kenya. Why don't we agree that we should have a lifelong learning policy that will have RPL and, or AL, I suppose that's adult learning, so that inclusivity is catered for. Many RPL successes in the formal education sector, but non-formal education and informal is not catered for. We cater for all of it. Sorry?
With the background knowledge that we are out of time.
Yeah, we are really out of time. 10 minutes out of time.
Thank you. A hand clap for our presenter, Shirley. I think for the other comments and questions, we could use the remaining time to share and maybe approach the presenter, if that's okay. So thank you so much, Shirley, for your wonderful presentation and giving us insights from the study report. And we are certain that we have been given the relevant knowledge that we need to reflect on our different countries and see where we stand, reflecting on status currently. What came through my mind was the need to decolonize. We have inherited systems that are holding us and having our hands tied. And maybe this is the generation that will turn things around and disrupt and make life better for everybody who has been framed in a certain way, that this is where you should follow, the path you should follow. But then we do not have the same opportunities and avenues before us that we should follow that same path. So we should recognize the different lives and experiences of people, that everybody should live life fully. So thank you so much, Dr. Shirley, for that insightful presentation. I hope you have been enriched as I am, dear participants. And we would like to recognize people who came in later. And we are going to that next session, but we'd like to go when we know who is around. So please, those who came in later and did not introduce themselves, I would like you to take this opportunity to please introduce yourself before we go into the next session.
I am Lillian Chagala from Uganda Business and Technical Examinations Board.
So much, you beat it. I have another participant here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diana Nampija, Department of Adult and Community Education, Makerere University.
Thank you, Dr. Diana. And I have another gentleman here.
I'm Tim Charles. I'm a principal lecturer in Samizi Training Institute of Social Development.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Betty Nandudu Muvita, District Community Development Officer, Namaingo District.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful to have you here. And we are almost full house, I think. We have another participant here. The chief planner.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kasita Ismaili from Ulala. Ulala stand is the Uganda Literacy and the Adult Learner Association. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I hope I did not leave anybody behind, leaving no one behind. So, wrapping up this session, we have seen the status, where we stand, the ideal, and we have a set of recommendations that have been put before us. And I thank you so much for being wonderful participants. I see all of us are now very alive and awake. And it's good enough. The next session is more engaging, and we might just move out of that chair into another chair. So I'm going to hand over the microphone to Dr. Nwagaba to take us through the next step.
They should clap for you for doing a very good job. I'm sorry to make you do something you hadn't planned for, but these things always happen in another learning context. I would like to make a very short comment regarding Andrew Opio, who was online and was talking about the Ugandan policy being so narrow, focusing at only adult literacy. I wanted to say that the present initiatives that were concluded actually last year in December, the ministry, in collaboration with the DVV, developed an non-formal adult learning and education strategy. I think that strategy is broader than the narrow policy, and the idea is that as we move forward, we are going to move away from that narrow focus to the much broader adult learning and education, which aligns very well with the ALISBA framework that I constantly talk about. Now, the next session is a very exciting session. We are going to start the process with Lydia. Sorry, I have to bring you back. The Pearl of Africa is very good at giving presents. Lydia has a box which has some sweets that have different colors. Now you will pick a sweet of a color of your choice. You eat the sweet if you want, but you keep the wrapper because we are interested in the color of the wrapper, not the sweet. So get a sweet of your choice, eat the sweet, but keep the wrapper. Is that very clear? So the choice is yours. And please, let us be ethical. Each one should pick one sweet. So even if you have a very huge appetite, you are kindly requested to be ethical and pick only one sweet. So Lydia, you can start the process. We are soon getting into a World Cafe where we are going to discuss the findings of this research, especially the recommendations. We are going to contextualize the presentation by Katie from UIL. We are going to put into consideration the speech made by the Honorable Minister, the opening remarks by the country director and regional director. all the discussions and questions that we have interfaced with, in addition to our own personal experiences and knowledge, they are all going to be useful in the cafe. There are 4 thematic areas that we are going to discuss, and there are 3 important things or important questions that we shall try to address. So the suites that we are receiving or picking from will decide which thematic area you are going to contribute to. Because the 4 groups have 4 colors, and each color represents the colors that we are picking from Lydia's present. So, like I was saying, the 4 thematic groups are the following. The first group will focus on stakeholders' roles and responsibilities in RPL. Let me not give the color yet, because it may influence those who are making the choices now. Let me be a bit patient. If you are not a sweet eater, remove the sweet, give it to a sweet eater, but keep the wrapper. They are chocolates. What is the difference between sweets and chocolates? They are the same. Okay. Has everyone got? There is the balance, or the balance is for me. The balance is mine. Hey. Okay, they say there are some colors and sizes that are popular. So let's get serious. The stakeholders' roles and responsibilities in RPL, if you picked a green one, that is where you belong. So if you have a green wrapper, you belong to stakeholders' roles and responsibilities, and the chair of that table is Caesar. Green. Now, if you picked blue, Caesar is the other one waving. So where he goes is where you go. But even the tables have those different cards. If you picked blue, you will be focusing on the theme, methods for assessment and accreditation of prior learning, and Dr. Diana is the team leader of that table. And she is, hey, are you not tricking me? She has accepted that she's tricking me. So hers was blue, the red one was an additional. That's the blue table. Now, if you picked yellow, and this one has no party affiliation, so yellow has nothing to do with the present party configuration in Uganda. So if you picked yellow, you're going to discuss processes to operationalize RPL. Frauke is the chairperson of that table, and she's there. Yes. And the last one is pink. Pink is close to red. So pink and red, they go together. You're going to focus on the thematic area, legal policies and frameworks. And Imelda is the chair of that table. Imelda is this young lady here. Yes. And the 3 main issues that you are going to discuss are the following. Very easy ones. The first one, current practices in Uganda and Tanzania. So when you go to your group, which is discussing stakeholders' roles and responsibilities, now there are adjustments in the chairs, but the adjustments will be communicated. The adjustments will be communicated. So the three major themes or issues that we are going to discuss at each table focus on current practices in Uganda and TZ in relation to the 4 thematic areas. The second one are the challenges involved in doing the issues in that thematic area. And the last one are the recommendations that you are proposing. Remember, we are using the research recommendations as our source of information. We are using the presentations that were made by Katie from UIL, the minister's speech, the comments and presentations by the regional director and country director, and the discussions that were happening in the room, plus our own personal experiences, what we know as individuals that have specific expertise in this area of adult learning and education. So you have about, the session will close at 5. So the issues that will have come out will be discussed tomorrow morning. So you have the time to discuss, write down, and the reporting will be done tomorrow morning. I want to thank you in advance for participating. Let me locate the tables. I think the yellow table is the first one here. And the team leader of this table will come. And then the second one, which is red and pink, is this one. And the other one, which is blue, is here. And the fourth one, which is green, is here. You are encouraged to join the tables that you chose yourselves. And let us be ethical, like we suggested. Join the tables of your choice. Others have boards where they will put, and others have, I call them what? These ones. Newsprint. The choice is really yours. You can use the cards, you can write. Really, the choice is yours. So, thank you for joining these different groups. Now, for our participants who are online, the unfortunate news I have for you is that it will not be possible to cover the discussions on the different tables that are discussing the thematic areas, but at least we promise that tomorrow morning we will discuss the findings, we will discuss their resolutions, and therefore you will get an opportunity to know what the different tables will have discussed. And since you have been listening to the issues that we are going to focus on, you could also, in your own way as individuals, also present your own ideas so that tomorrow when we are getting the responses from the various tables, we could also get the input from those that are participating online. We want to thank you for your very active participation, and we want to say bye-bye, and God bless you, and have a nice evening. Thank you. Robert, I am reliably informed that you are chairing one of the tables, and we really ask you very humbly to take on the task of chairing the table, which we are going to show you. Thank you. Always ever ready.